All right, let's dig a little bit deeper into this. Is mechanical shifting dead or not? Hey everybody, Nick from TriRig here. And I know last week I said that was going to be the last video of 2024, but some of the comments that you guys had were just so great that I want to continue this back and forth just a little bit more and dig just a little bit deeper into this idea of mechanical shifting, whether it's dead or not, and sort of what the place of electronic shifting is in our sport going forward. There were a number of really good comments that I kind of want to summarize and dig into just a little bit more. So I have a couple of derailleurs here that we can use as sort of examples of what's going on. Here is a SRAM Red long cage mechanical rear derailleur. And there's something kind of satisfying about the simplicity and elegance of a mechanical part like this. You know, as long as you pull the cable, the thing will move. You can use this in friction shifting mode and it'll do as many gears as you like, anything from 7 gears all the way up to 12 probably. I think it'll probably depend on the exact cassette spacing there, so don't quote me on the 12 thing, but you know, there's something elegant about mechanical and timeless, if you will. On the other hand, you know, we've got over here an Ultegra Di2 derailleur, and this one still will function with just about any Shimano wires and junction boxes that you can get. It uses the port that Shimano developed probably about 10 years ago. Shimano went through 2 versions of their cabling system. The first version, they thought, we're going to have 5 wires. One was the ground, and then the other 4 were shorts that could be front derailleur shift up, front derailleur shift down, rear derailleur shift up, rear derailleur shift down. And so when you clicked one of those buttons, it would just cause a mechanical short and it would go through the system, and the part that needed to do that particular action would execute that particular action. And then they realized that was kind of limiting, because what if you wanted to do trim adjustments, or what if you wanted to do a firmware update, or what if you wanted to do any other kind of communication? There's a lot more messages you might want to send than just those 4, up, down, up, down. And so they went to a 2-wire system. I believe it still works on the principle of sending shorts, but it's, you know, the power in the ground. And then what happens is when you click a button, it'll send a series of really fast shorts at a particular interval and speed, kind of communicating something like Morse code. Think of it that way. It isn't Morse code, it's a different communication protocol, but it sends a number of, you know, dots and dashes, and that tells the system what it is that you want to do. I think the guys at Fairwheel Bikes reverse engineered this a long time ago, at least for the system that was current at that time. And of course they've updated things and things change over time, but the cables have remained the same. And so this cable from whenever this particular derailleur was made is compatible with cables still made today with the Shimano Di2 system. So they figured that part out relatively quickly. The first generation was that 5-pin nonsense, and then every generation since then has been the same 2-pin waterproofing cable that's relatively small, it's relatively easy to route, and it gives them that flexibility. SRAM, on the other hand, they were wireless from the get-go, right, with ETAP and now ETAP Access. And the part that I really like about SRAM is that they've continued to push the mechanical front with things like their, you know, angled rear derailleur and front derailleur parallelograms to improve your chain line, things like the clutch drag system. So this is their 1x-Rival mechanical rear derailleur, and it has a fluid clutch inside to improve performance on 1x drivetrains. It reduces chain slap. There's now a fluid clutch in all of their Axis rear derailleurs as well. So they've really pushed the development of the mechanical side of these systems in addition to the electronic side of the systems, and that's something I like. But let's get to your comments and sort of how they fit into all of this. So here's a comment from Il Pinacolo. Nothing becomes obsolete faster than electronics. And that's a true statement, right? So just as I was demonstrating with the Shimano system, if you bought a first generation Di2 group set, that thing is 100% obsolete today. There's no new parts being manufactured that are compatible with it, but both Shimano and SRAM, to their credit, have tried to account for that as much as possible. Shimano starting with their second generation, and SRAM really from their first generation, tried to keep backwards and cross compatibility as much as they could. I think that's a smart statement. Nothing becomes obsolete faster than electronics. But it's still the case that you could pick up, you know, a 9 or 10-year-old piece of electronic shifting equipment and have it work today. These things are fairly robust, in my opinion. But it's a good comment to think about. All right, number 2. I prefer mechanical shifting. I'm not against electronics, but I hate batteries. Remembering to charge lights and bike computer is enough hassle for me. Pushing for performance on a race bike is fine, but on a training bike, I want the least amount of friction to go to ride. I would even prefer external cable routing for ease of maintenance. So that's not nothing. I empathize with that comment. I've gone to pick up a bike that I hadn't ridden in a while. I want to go, but it was electronic shifting and I realized the battery was dead and I didn't keep a stable of charged batteries for it. That's the worst, right? I'm ready to go ride and now I have to wait half an hour to get this thing to charge. That's not cool. But on the other hand, that's really, part of modern life, isn't it? Like you use your cell phone every day and you charge that. I use a watch every day. I just put it on the nightstand every night. And so if you're in the habit of riding regularly, charging a battery may not be that big of a deal to add to that sort of a regimen. But like I mentioned with, that bike that's been sitting on the rack for a while that now you want to take down and ride because it's just the perfect occasion for that particular bike. If you're fortunate enough to have such a stable of bikes, that's going to be one of your first world problems if you're using electronic shifting. Okay, good point there. Borist7278, I prefer the feel of mechanic over electronic. Also, sometimes I do long tours and it's easier to repair on the road if something goes wrong. So, okay, the feel portion, I actually don't resonate with that. In my experience, mechanical is much more fickle than electronic. The electronic shifting components are so reliable. It is going to move the exact right amount, probably down to the 100th of a millimeter, whereas your cabled system, if you're at a 10th of a millimeter accuracy, you're doing really great. So I actually prefer the feel of electronic. At first, I thought that I would be in this guy's camp, way back when Di2 first came out. I thought I'd be less connected to the bike with an electronic shifting system. But in fact, I found the opposite to be true. It feels really instantaneous. It feels like you're more connected to the bike when you have an electronic system that works as well as Di2 and eTap do. Assuming everything's fine, assuming you've done everything properly, in my opinion, they work really well. But that's another sort of category of comments that we get, people preferring mechanical for the sort of feel of it. But in my experience, I think electronic feels great. And in terms of the repair aspect, the more these electronic systems trickle out into the landscape, the less that becomes an important issue. Like, for example, if you need an eTap battery, that's available at most bike shops now because there are so many eTap systems and that battery has been the same since 2015 when the system came out. So yeah, maybe you couldn't find the eTap battery, but also maybe you can't find the exact bolt that you need for a particular thing that goes wrong with your rear derailleur. They're not always standard bolts as well. So interesting comment. None of these are things that I'm saying outright are right or wrong, but definitely food for thought. Okay, Chris Kircher says, my problem is I'm going long on my front end scoops with an extension plate and it brings me almost to the full length of a shift cable and it limits my front end turn radius. Okay, this is a great point actually. I just said I was gonna say none of them are right or wrong, but this is absolutely right. So there's a trend for people to test longer and longer and longer positions. And with mechanical, that can be a problem. If you wanna add 30, 40 millimeters of reach to your bike, if you're trying something relatively extreme, you may not even have the ability to do so without recabling your bike if you're on mechanical. Whereas if you're on electronic, you just move it. Nothing has to change, right? If you're on a Di2 wire, maybe you need a longer wire, but usually you have so much extra wire stuffed into those extensions or whatever anyway that it definitely isn't an issue. But on mechanical, you're gonna be in trouble whether you're trying to change reach because you've already cut the cable to a certain length, or like he said, because standard cables just aren't long enough for modern positions. So great point there. That is a point in favor of electronic, at least for modern triathlon and time trialing positions. Oh, Chris also says, I'll never give up my rim brakes. Thank you, Chris. Okay. This is one of my favorites. I'm not even going to try and pronounce this username, but it ends in 2603. SRAM didn't reduce the complexity per se, but crammed it into a circuit board. That said, electronic systems are very reliable and they're all around us. Your car has tons of microprocessors, critical infrastructure, such as electrical distribution, relies on electronics, planes fly depending on electronics. You already depend on electronics working stably. I don't think the line should be at bicycle shifters. That's a pretty compelling argument right there. Now, it goes back to the sort of like, I don't want to have to worry about charging this battery, or if I want to grab this bike I haven't used, because all winter I couldn't ride it and now I do. I don't want to have to remember to go through this regimen of whatever. But there's a good point here that we rely on electronics everywhere. Saying that SRAM didn't reduce complexity is something I'm going to push back on, because they've really helped develop one-by systems into something robust and reliable for professional racing and everything else. And that's something that didn't exist before they did. So I argue that they have greatly reduced complexity. Sure, there's a circuit board in ETAP wireless, but there's also a circuit board in Di2 wired. SRAM now lets you have a derailleur and 2 blips as your drivetrain. That's incredible to me. That's like the dream. When the ETAP system first came out, that's what I wished for, right? In 2015, ETAP came out, but it was like, okay, we've got wireless derailleurs, but we have a whole medusa of cables at the front end, and now that's finally been eliminated. So I think SRAM really has helped reduce complexity. And like I said, they've been really pushing the mechanical side as well. The fluid clutch in the rear derailleur, the angled parallelograms in the front and rear helping to improve the chain line. All that stuff is great. It's meaningful. It reduces mechanical friction. It improves the reliability of one-by shifting, etc. But yeah, that idea, hey, we already rely on electronics, why should we draw the line at shifters? I think that's a pretty interesting argument. And last one here, there are a lot of comments like this. I think there's a lot of people that feel this way, myself included. Will McElgan says, after years on mechanical, I just got my first electronic group set, and it's just so much more consistent. I get so frustrated with my mechanical shifter bike now. So really interesting food for thought. If you have more, to sort of fight back on anything I've said or to add to these comments, leave them in the comments below. I definitely want to know what you guys think about all this. This is definitely the last video for 2024. Happy New Year to all of you out there. Happy riding, and I'll see you next time.